Guilloud, who is the co-director of Project South, and Steph, along with the rest of the Project South staff, was also very instrumental in organizing and mobilizing the community in support of the families when the cases were happening, and prior to that and ever since. And so Steph is going to talk to us about the current moment we're in and the response of social justice movements.
Well, thank y'all so much, and I cannot describe the honor it is to be with this panel and this group of folks that have been committed to this struggle for so long, and have so much to say. So it's an honor to be here and take part, and also to be with our neighbors in our neighborhood. Project South is across the railroad tracks, and we're really pleased to be here. And that Imam Farrakhan opened up the masjid is just a huge honor. And when and really 10 years ago, and when Shifa was kidnapped, and one of the Project South members, Sonali, and the family came to a community meeting and made an ask and said we need to come together. And this kind of moment is when communities get torn apart and when families get strained, so we need to be together. We really stepped to that call. And it's a front line that I've learned so much about, and so I just want to speak to that because I feel like as an organizer and as a co-director of a movement building organization, we have an imperative and to understand this particular front line and recognize what's happening, what our position is, and how to act, and how to, I think, act in the ways that folks have inspired us on this panel. So I want to back up and just even talk about war on terror and what that has meant over the last many years. And a young person who is part of the Project South family said one time when we were talking about something, she's now in her 20s, she said, I thought terror was a country. A war on terror. Why wouldn't it be? Well, two individuals, not case by case. So if that part we need to look at and understand. It's not a criminal or a terrorist. It is a war on terror, and they are defining that any which way they want at all times. And it has morphed. You know, it could be one day. I mean, it's dangerously morphed and intentionally ambiguous. It could be a violent act. It could be a mix of violence, ideology, and race. It could be what part of the world you're from. It could be if you're a Palestinian and challenge the U.S.-Israeli occupation, that's terrorism. If you are on your way to becoming a thoughtful person or have investigated Islam or your religion or even just dissent itself, it's just indiscriminate violence. It's violence against citizens. It has no definition. And by having no definition, it serves the uses that the people that use it. But I tried to look and see where's the origin of this term terror and terrorism in this particular play. And way back in 19th century France, it was used to talk about an abuse of power and threat of violence. And it actually was talked about as when terror was used as an instrument of state policy. I'm going to go with that one. Because terror is being used as an instrument of state policy. And it's creating these frameworks. And so I kind of want to shift the name itself because this is a war of terror. This is a war of terror that has instigated and agitated fear, not just individual to individual, but systems to systems, countries to countries. It has impacted national law, international law, and across the board. And preemptive prosecution as a piece of that legal framework that has impacted families on this panel and across the country is a huge piece of framework that that affects us all in all different kinds of ways and could be used in ways that we haven't even anticipated yet. And, like Sister Karima and others have said, the abuse of power as it relates to containing and controlling dissent is not new. So my entry points to this, to political work in general, was actually learning about COINTELPRO, was learning about the assassination of Fred Hampton, was learning about political prisoners, and learning directly from Nicaraguan social movements, all of that before pre-9/11, before, you know, in the late 90s. And what I learned from looking at that through study and organizing, I mean, all of the black liberation struggles in the U.S., democratically elected Sandinistas, and many other global liberation movements were all considered and named terrorists or terrorism in one way or another. Many global social movements, right? And so understanding that and trying to dig a little deeper, I learned what it means to actually question or challenge the existing arrangement of power. It means the U.S. state and military apparatus will be unleashed against you. It means a broad media campaign and social narrative will be constructed to redefine the reality and demonize the people involved. And that history and your history will be intentionally buried, convoluted, and misremembered. We've heard that across the board just tonight and can go even a little deeper in terms of the HBO documentary that just came out that did focus on the Sadequee and Ahmed case. It's tough. But and all of these narratives we have to be vigilant on and understand where they can be useful and how to use them and where they can be really harmful as they define these narratives that then start to define the law, whether it's a lie or not. And so I feel like this discussion really addresses all of those aspects of the war on terror and sort of lays out the challenge in front of us as social movement folks and as activists and organizers in Atlanta and thinking about globally what our impact is and what it means. So part of those are the exact flip, right? We have to uncover the realities of that history that led to this moment and to the new tactics that they're using. We have to tell the true stories of resistance. Just the story of Shifa inside that solitary confinement for 3.5 years is a story of resistance. Because he came out of that and then came into a trial and represented himself. So a person who had been not just silenced in a theoretical or metaphoric way, but literally silenced, and then was encouraged to stay silent, stood up to speak his truth in the court that was coming at him in every direction. And I saw real courage in that. We have to engage and support the people who are most affected and be in solidarity with Muslim youth, with global movements across international lines. And we have to learn the lessons of how this thing works. How this war on terror is a systemic approach to create fear and to stop and control dissent. Because we have to be able to anticipate their next moves. I believe we can absolutely tie some of the Georgia legislation that just got passed through, and some vetoed, some not, to some of these same legal frameworks. When you were talking about a religious determination of who is good, bad, worthy, or acceptable, that is this same and similar framework. The First Amendment Defense Act and all that stuff. And so organizing across these realities, bringing people together, that is our imperative. And so that was one thing I wanted to just offer, was looking at the tactics of the war on terror and then really identifying how we can organize as movements. So one, if this myth of justice, that sort of, it can be solved in the courts of this individualized crime and punishment, the way we can respond as movement is to really look at the systemic analysis and understand this not as a case by case, what did he say to what chat group on what day. That is a myth. That is not relevant to what they're even trying to do. They're setting precedent. They don't even care what happened in the Gmail chats. They're setting a much larger, more dangerous legal precedent and building careers off of it. It's also the links between all the law enforcement agencies, right? So the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, which bloomed in budget when every other public service was shrunk and annihilated and eliminated over this same time period. Right? ICE, how they relate to local law enforcement, to county, to sheriff, to jails, to the local police themselves, and who they see, who they target, the racial profiling that happens to the young students at Carver High School and the young Muslim youth in Atlanta and others. So that is that myth, and then looking at, and I think being able to challenge that systemic constellation is one of the challenges that we need to take up. Another tactic on the war on terror is public surveillance. And Azade's done a lot of work, and other folks and lawyers that have really taken this on and really understood and delineated the levels to which public surveillance and domestic surveillance have increased over the last many years. So what is the movement organizing response to that? To claim public space, to claim public expression, to exercise our freedoms of speech, to exercise our freedom of movement in space, in public space, to exercise our ability to study and pursue knowledge and wisdom, to associate with who we want to and need to, through dialogue, through religion, through spaces that we need to create. Not because it's a constitutional right or some Bill of Rights that was designed at some point in the world, but because it's part of our dignity and part of our humanity to exercise those rights. The mega marches in 2006 of immigrant folks and folks who are undocumented, those folks taking up public space, showing themselves as a group, that was an example of that movement organizing against something, a tactic like public surveillance. And then I brought this, this visual I think is really stunning, and it's an event that's happening tomorrow night at Trinity College, hijabs and hoodies, and making those connections. Students are being challenged, so Trinity's in Hartford, Connecticut, but students are being challenged to wear either a hoodie or a hijab, and to make a statement, to claim that space, and then to come together across all the differences that we assume or we're told to assume and taught to assume in order to build that solidarity and build stronger organizing. So that's tomorrow night. We're co-tweeting. We're trying to stay together. But it's beautiful in terms of, in a moment when I think folks are, when there is so much fear, and there are folks, and we're taught to kind of decide who's got it worse. This is a moment where we can come together. A third piece of this, and I believe it's an actual tactic of the war on terror, is isolation. So that 3.5-year solitary confinement is one of the more extreme versions of isolation. But so is when Muslim families step up and ask for support and don't get it, because people are afraid of associating with terrorism, or the idea of it, or the perception of it, or what the legal courts are saying about it. That is also a tactic to destroy communities' abilities to come together. So how do we build movement organizing around that? Association. Build those relationships. Come together. Exercise that freedom in that way. Make it explicit. Make it multiracial. Make it multi-faith. Make it look strong in that way. We did that at Shifa's trial. We did that at the trial. We packed the courthouse every single day as much as we could. We did a media campaign to talk about the specifics, not as an individual, but as a family, what was happening. We did that public education, that awareness, talking through these terms and understanding them better. And we do these assemblies. If isolation is a tactic, then assemblies, coming together and asserting this power, is another way to break that. Whether that's 3 people, and Sister Karima brought the 3 people coming together, could be a riot. And the anti-riot legislation is still on the books. So let's riot, let's get together. And we might have tea there. We might have cookies. Might be a riot, might not. But we have these assemblies, we come together, we talk, we share, we understand each other, we do break bread. We do come together and forge strategic alliance to combat this bigger system. We did that through the preemptive prosecution PMA that really tried to break down war on drugs. It's not surprising or coincidence that war on terror is a mirror of that term. War on immigrants was happening at the exact same time in 2011. HB 56 and 87 and all of the across the South was happening at the same time. So bringing those 3 groups together to say all of the organizing that we're doing in each of these places actually can benefit and share strategies and tactics with each other was powerful. The assemblies of Muslim families that have been coming together and saying, we're not going to be afraid of this, we're not going to be afraid of what y'all are telling us about Islamophobia and all of this, and really addressing piece by piece. And we've been able to be in some of those spaces, and those have always been an honor. And then assemblies of formerly incarcerated people who are also the tactic of isolation and disenfranchisement is there, immigrants, youth, and other targets of the state, other oppressed people, include this, as we create those assemblies and those spaces, include the war on terror as something, an analysis, something we need to come up against in that work that we do, in our political organizing work, in our work around. So I think there's a lot of powerful ways that we can really strategize to neutralize the tactics of the war on terror. As big as it sounds, as broad as it is, there is so much power when we come together. And that's really, and that's something I think the imperative is related to the anti-riot law, that they create these laws not just for one population, not just for one group, and not just for one set of 10 years. But they create them so that they can use them against any and all of us at all times. And so that challenges us, I think, to step up and really win against the war on terror. So that's how I want to close with that, because I think there's also weaknesses. As Sister Karima said, they ignored the women. The women weren't listed on that list of terrorists and dangerous people, and that was a mistake. And that's a weakness on the state's part. We need to find those weaknesses and exploit them in this era, and certainly organize with the women. Right. And to understand that too, I think to understand how trauma, and Sonali put it, and Ahmed, how the state attack on one person or groups of people affect so many more people than that one person. The ripple effect, the effect on the family system. So we have to come together to support those families, and do that very explicitly, openly, and publicly. But I think we can win against this war on terror when we organize to dismantle those many, many systems that are overlapping and keep this war in place. I think we can win when we exercise our power to live in our full dignity. And I think we can win when we come together without fear. And we've done that tonight. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to move into the question and answer in a minute, but before we lose any more of you, be sure to sign in if you haven't already, so we can keep you posted about Project South events and gatherings, and take some of our newsletters so you can learn more about our work. And also some ways that Project South can help support Muslim and immigrant communities specifically. We are available to do Know Your Rights and Defend Our Rights presentations in collaboration with some of our partners, such as the Council on American Islamic Relations. We are available to help provide counsel to folks who are being approached by the FBI, or formations such as the Joint Terrorist Task Force. So please do contact us if a family member or a community member is contacted by the FBI. And also help support you if you're facing religious discrimination or other types of egregious discrimination. We are here to help. And lastly, on our immigrants' rights work, we are partnering with organizations and coalitions such as Georgia Detention Watch, who Kevin is representing today, to document and challenge the oppressive conditions at these detention centers and prisons. And we have several of them in this state, and they're known to be some of the worst in the country. So if you do have a family member or a friend who's being detained, or generally want to get involved in that work, please do let us know. And all of our contact information is on the website. So with that, I wanted to go ahead and move to the Q&A.